Call to order the meeting of September 11th, 2017 of the Transportation, Mobility, and Infrastructure Commission. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, the first item on the agenda is presentation by the public of any matters not on the agenda. Do we have any interested speakers this evening? Okay, I guess not. Next item is Commissioner Communications. I understand there's a commissioner who would like to bring something up.
Yeah, I know that the Linden Loop has received some publicity over the last couple of weeks regarding the road diet. And so just wanting to, I know that there was a meeting, constituent meeting downstairs last month, but I wanted to see kind of what, with the publicity and everything, what the city is kind of looking at to do some more, if there's any outreach, if there's any other feedback that they've been taking from the community and any action steps that they're taking from that.
So this is, again, not an agendized item, so of course we're not going to have discussion on this. We did continue to take a look at the Linden Loop to see if some of the concerns by the community were verifiable. There were no issues that were identified when staff went out on site, and in fact, multiple members of the Transportation Division, Engineering Division, and Public Works, Community Development were all out on site. There were no significant issues as far as the operations go, and I think a lot of the concerns were alleviated, but when people actually saw that it was actually operating consistent with what was anticipated. At this time, we are not proposing any significant changes to the design and are pursuing completing the construction as scheduled.
Great, thank you.
All right, any other communications? Okay, let's see. Our next item is approval of the consent agenda. Do we have a motion to approve?
I'll motion to approve the minutes from August 15th.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So moved. Okay, our main item tonight is presentation of the draft 3rd and C Gateway Action Plan. And staff will be presenting. Good evening.
Good evening, Commissioners. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jane Griblin. I am a Next Step intern for the Economic Development and Housing Department, as well as my fellow intern Eric Will here. And tonight we will be presenting to you a draft 3rd and C Gateway Action Plan. So the 3rd and C Gateway Action Plan is set as a high priority policy agenda on the 2017 strategic plan, and it is derived from the 2015 Washington Realized document. And so our draft 3rd and C Gateway Action Plan serves as an intermediary between the 2015 Washington Realized document and a future Washington specific plan. And so a little bit of background on the Washington Realized document. Washington Realized is a sustainable community strategy, or an SCS, and it was approved in 2015. And it has 2 main goals for this document. The first goal is to integrate transit-oriented design, which is TOD, into the community of the Washington District And the second is to provide recommendations for interim and long-term updates in order to prepare a complete community strategy. And so a little bit of background for the transit-oriented design, or TOD. So the TOD strategy seeks to establish walkable, mixed-use transportation to connect a variety of uses such as residential, recreation, and retail. And this is to provide connections to the rest of West Sacramento, the Sacramento River, and downtown Sacramento. And so the purpose of our presentation tonight is to inform the commission on the mobility and infrastructure projects that we have set in our draft action plan, and to provide an update on in-concept, in-design, and in-planning projects that we have. And so this is a diagram of our boundaries of what we define as the 3rd NC Gateway study area. And so the boundaries of our study area are the Broderick Boat Ramp to the north, the Sacramento River to the east, East Street to the south, and 4th Street to the west. And this is shown by the red lines. And this is adapted from Focus Area 2, which is defined in Washington Realize, which is the little cloud shape on the second diagram right there. And so we expanded the boundaries in order to include connectivity between the neighborhood and the riverfront access, as well as some Parks and Rec uses in the area. And so the layout of our draft action plan encompasses some different study areas, the study area, and then some different projects, which are mobility projects, parks and art projects, and infrastructure projects. And this evening, we will be presenting to you the infrastructure and mobility projects. And so the layout of our slides that we're going to be having tonight, we are going to be having 5 different things on each slide. And so Eric will be presenting 5 of our mobility and infrastructure projects. And so for each project, we're going to have a project description, some key findings that we developed during our research process, some project deliverables, policy direction derived from the Washington Realize document, and policy questions to consider throughout the implementation of the projects. And with that, I'll hand it over to Eric.
Okay, good evening. Let's see. Great, went the right way. So I'll be discussing the 3 mobility projects as well as the 2 infrastructure projects that we have included in the 3rd NC Gateway Action Plan thus far. We'll be discussing the 3rd Street streetscape design, the 2nd Street reconfiguration, the mainline connection study, parking management improvements, and the levee setback. So these are the 5 projects I'll be going over fairly quickly here. So as much as possible, all of these projects within 3rd NC are supposed to have a multidisciplinary approach, so not just transportation, but also economic development in mind, recreation in mind, as well as housing. So bringing all of these things together within all of these projects and focusing on the mobility and infrastructure projects this evening. So first, we have 3rd Street streetscape design. So the 3rd Street streetscape design is supposed to design and construct the proposed improvements as set forth in Washington Realize, so this policy and regulatory document that we're speaking of, as part of a combined layered street network. So what the street network does is it prioritizes automobile, pedestrian, and bicycle into the street network. So as we can see, from the diagrams over here, we're looking at this focus area and contemplating the street design within the focus area itself. So a couple of findings that came out of Washington Realize that we wanted to bring to your attention was that first, the combined layered street network that I mentioned, but also that if we utilize a 3rd Street approach, which you can see in the yellow circle on the diagram on the left, this may complement Phase 1 of the Bridge District, as well as possibly increasing traffic levels. Also, it's recommended that C Street be widened, raised, that a raised medium be installed for the streetcar, which is proposed, as well as striping be painted on the street to accommodate the C Street Bridge project. Currently, there has been some initial work done on C Street, as you can see on the diagram on the right, in terms of design, but not quite as much done on 3rd Street as well. Oops. So as Jane mentioned, I'll be discussing a few different things with you this evening for each of these projects. For 3rd Street streetscape design, we have a few deliverables such as designing and constructing the 3rd Street streetscape improvements, including sidewalks, street trees, public art, high visibility crossings, as well as a cross-section, some preliminary engineering, and coordinating with the design of 2nd Street reconfiguration, which I will speak about soon. And so Jane also mentioned that there is some policy direction from Washington Realize that we're pulling from. And so, as you can see, we're pulling from this with the knowledge that we should be focused on completing the vision described in the plan, acknowledging the existing investment. So what's currently there, what are the current existing uses, as well as enhancing access to the riverfront. So once again, what's there and what can be there. So finally, this evening, as part of each of these projects, we'll be looking at a sample policy question or two. So for this one, we're looking at, when assessing the possible lane configurations for this section of 3rd Street, how should staff implement the direction provided by the combined layered street network? So we're not necessarily asking for any feedback this evening. If you have it, we'd love to take it at the end of our presentation, but these are some of the questions that we'd like to be answering as we go through implementation of each of these projects, so as they come to fruition. So, with that, we move on to the 2nd Street reconfiguration. And so we've divided up the 2nd Street reconfiguration into 3 segments. So we have segment A, B, and C, or north, central, and south. We have a couple of pictures up as well. So the 2nd Street segment A, B, and C, as you can see from our diagram. And so it's relevant, the 2nd Street reconfiguration is in terms of the C Street Bridge project that is proposed. And we recognize that 2nd Street needs to be reconfigured, redesigned, and constructed in the 3 segments that we've laid out here in order to consider the impacts of the bridge as well as what else is going on in the area. So as I mentioned, we have section A, B, and C. So first, in terms of findings within 2nd Street, due to planned infrastructure improvements associated with the C Street Bridge, maintaining 2nd Street in its current location could be challenging and may potentially limit development potential within the surrounding parcels. Also, if constructed, the redesigned 2nd Street could help permanently solve parking issues. In terms of segment B, as we can see on the next slide, as you'll notice, ends currently in a small dead end, as according to what the proposed C Street Bridge project says currently, but we'd say that this is, according to our findings, is not consistent with Washington Realized policy. Also, the segment from B to C or C to B is currently not connected, and C currently ends in a small loop that doesn't seem to go anywhere. So, based on our project deliverables for 2nd Street, so what we're trying to get done here is to reconfigure, design, construct the segments, but also to maximize access and connection to both existing roadways along the Riverwalk, to define future infrastructure uses based on a land map, and to protect and enhance the development and potential, including river vistas and view corridors of the parcels between 2nd Street and the Sacramento River. So we're trying to implement all these things together, understanding that it's not just the street, but it's the surrounding parcels within the street as well. And then we're also looking to take action against the brownfield site. So located on B, it's the nice little green squiggly thing you can see on the diagram, is a known brownfield site. So that's part of our action items for this project. And so our policy direction for 2nd Street is to maintain the grid street pattern to the extent possible as it reflects the heritage of the street and the grid as a whole. And so we're trying to look at the historic uses of this area and see what we can do to maintain them while also maximizing future potential economic development. So in terms of sample policy questions, we're looking at a couple for your consideration this evening as well as into the future. So when determining the reconfiguration for segment B, consider how to best utilize the roadway as a mitigation measure for the existing contamination or the brownfield site. And then when assessing the proposed partial abandonment for segment C, assess the impacts to locate circulation. So once again, these are simply just thought exercises at this time, but if we do have any feedback, we would love to hear it. Moving on is the mainline connection study. So this is a project that focuses on the Union Pacific mainline that runs along 5th Street. And so we have identified that there are 4 crossings within this mainline connection study that we would like to analyze and look further into. So we've determined them crossing A, B, C, and D for ease of understanding. And so we're looking at 5th Street, 4th Street, 3rd Street, as well as under the I Street bridge currently, where we have the Riverwalk north and south connected as an unpaved path currently, next to where all the boulders are. So what this project seeks to do is to analyze these crossings to understand what recommendations can be made for these crossings in order to enhance pedestrian, auto, or bicycle uses. And so currently, as we can see from our pictures, not all of the intersections even connect on the other side. So crossing B, for example, or crossing D are informal crossings currently. And so we're looking at what actions can we take or what recommendations can we follow in order to improve those or figure out what's the best recommended solution. Oops, keep going the wrong way. And so for the mainline connection study, what we'd be looking to do is, like I mentioned, complete a crossing assessment that analyzes the 4 identified crossings along the Union Pacific mainline, as well as to assess any enhancements to the 2 controlled crossings, so as I mentioned, which are A and C, or the uncontrolled crossings, which are B and D. And so we're also looking at this from the lens of the streetcar, and so from what Washington Realized has told us in terms of policy, we're looking at this as when the streetcar comes in, where are we putting it? What are the viable options? And Washington Realized has an answer for us that 5th Street crossing is the only viable option for traversing the Union Pacific Main Line, as well as with streetcar, as well as rail tracks can pose challenges. And so as we saw, if I go back really quick, to crossing B, we don't currently have a crossing, there's just a fence and there's the rail there. So what can we do about that? And in terms of sample policy questions, just a couple more in terms of the crossings. So how does staff proceed with assessing the value of the crossing B improvements given the lack of policy direction in Washington Realized? So we recognize from our findings and research that there's not a lot going on in Washington Realized, so where do we go from here with crossing B as it stands, which is where 4th and D Street is with the no connection currently. And then when assessing the enhancements to crossings A and C, so the controlled crossings, how should staff implement the direction provided by the combined layered street network, which we mentioned earlier? So how do we prioritize our automobiles, bicyclists, and pedestrians? Okay, and now we're moving on to our infrastructure projects. So we have the parking management first, and then we'll be speaking about the levee setback. So first, the parking management improvements. The Third and C Gateway Action Plan recognizes the importance in parking management techniques, as well as the fact that we need to look more into and implement more parking management techniques within the Washington District. So as we can see from the diagrams on the slide, so on the left we see there's a lot of vacant and underutilized land as of 2013, and then also the current existing uses in 2017, so broken down by recreation, utility, residential, retail, office, and commercial. So as we can see, there is currently a lot of residential within the area as well as residential parking, and so we're looking at parking management as a whole of where or and how can we manage our parking so that it's inclusive of what we're going to be doing with the area as well as what we're doing now. So in terms of transportation, recreation, housing, as I said before, a multidisciplinary approach. So in terms of our findings, major findings within this area, there's a sufficient supply of street parking, but there are some barriers to accessibility. And most of the Third and C Gateway study area is eligible for B or preferential parking permits, but few new permits have been issued recently. And then finally, the city currently does not have demand management techniques implemented that were discussed in Washington Realized for this area. So just looking at a little bit of a disconnect between what we have in Washington Realized and what we're doing currently, or what we need to implement. So just a few project deliverables in terms of designing and implementing parking management. So as I mentioned, need to look more into this as well as to determine our technique for the area. We noticed that there's been some illegal or misleading signage within the Washington district, and so removing that and also ensuring that we get appropriate signage going in the area. And looking at lease or interim improvements within the area, specifically under the viaduct, since there is some current informal parking there as of now. And then just to determine what, if any, modifications or alterations should be made to the preferential B parking permit areas within Washington. So where they are now, is it utilized to the best of our ability, or can we alter it to make it better? And so simply for the policy direction, we're looking at using management, enforcement, and pricing to protect adjacent residential neighborhoods for parking from commercial uses. And so as we look at imbuing the area with more commercial uses, how can we balance the residential with the commercial uses? And so for our sample policy question regarding parking management, we're just looking at the existing parking in the area and considering the impacts of the C Street Bridge project. How can we implement the direction provided in Washington Realized as well as the current municipal code, which does have a little bit to say about parking management techniques. And finally, we have our levee setback work that is in relation to the C Street Bridge project as well as the impacts that that will bring. And so this is a fairly straightforward one that we need to determine the levee setback. We don't currently have any project deliverables other than the coordination cross-departmentally to ensure that the design of the levee works in a way that we can balance both economic development and safety. So just ensuring that those two can be balanced out well. And our policy direction is simply that it's important that the levee be designed in a way that balances flood protection, so safety needs, with the importance of creating opportunity sites within Washington. So that is all I have in terms of projects for you this evening. I am going to hand it back to Jane really quickly, and we do have staff here from Economic Development in case there are any questions about the presentation. Thank you.
So we are going to be taking our draft Third and C Gateway Action Plan to all the applicable commissions. We have already taken it to the Parks and Rec Commission meeting in August. And so next we're going to be taking it to the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Commission and the Economic Development and Housing Commission, both this month, later this month. And then in December to the Planning Commission, and then hopefully going for some city council approval in January of next year. So with that, we'll take any comments or questions from you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions of staff or the presenters?
You mentioned a little bit about the streetcar and the C Street Bridge. So what are some of the, especially on the beautifications and all that, are you making it so that they're adaptable for when whenever those things come into fruition, that it's designed with those major infrastructure projects included?
Yes, so I would say that all of the everything within the Third and C Gateway Action Plan is planning on trying to work as best as we can with those projects and proposed projects being implemented. So assuming that those things should be happening.
Ms. Griblin, Mr. Will, thank you for your informative presentation today. It was a very well-delivered and well-presented presentation. I just have a couple of questions about various of the projects, and so I might just move in order, starting with Project 1 that you described today, the Third Street's streetscape design project. And the first question is just, because this isn't my field of expertise in my day job, just a question of clarification. So in the project description, it says, design and construct the Third Street streetscape improvements, including wide sidewalks, street trees, public art, and high visibility crossings. And could you describe a little bit what high visibility crossings would entail? Is that a crosswalk with a street signal? Is that something that's age-friendly with a audio component?
We have a staff member.
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Katie Yancey. I'm a senior program manager in the Economic Development Department. I was also the project manager for the transit-oriented development strategy in Washington Realize. I'd be happy to answer your question. So what they mean by high quality really is that we have a lot of unmarked crossings. They also don't have the appropriate approaches that are necessary that signal that a pedestrian is going to cross, so they're not ADA accessible. They're not signalized. So part of what we're going to do with the Third Street streetscape design is try to identify what are the appropriate pedestrian improvements, bicycle improvements that are necessary to control traffic, to indicate that this is a crossing that's occurring, because there is some visibility issues on Third Street. The main line crossing does create quite a significant hump, and so you do run into some issues when you're traveling both southbound and northbound. You kind of have a difficult time seeing over it, and so one of the things that we wanted to focus on is, as we're creating these pedestrian crossings where you're crossing Third Street or using your bicycle to cross Third Street, that's very controlled and safe because it recognizes those limitations in the visibility. And so the exact design work hasn't been done yet, but the intent is to really be very mindful that you're now kind of in a place where the pedestrian is expected to have equal priority as the automobile. And that's from the Washington Realize document. The Washington Realize document concludes that on that section of Third Street that they have equal priority.
Great, I think that's great. I used to live in Capitol Yards across from the Ziggurat, so I know Third Street, that stretch, isn't the most pedestrian-friendly right now, and it isn't the most streetlight-friendly as well. It's pretty dark at night, and so I was wondering, as part of the streetscape improvements, does that include streetlight improvements as well, just since I didn't notice that highlighted in the features?
So what I would answer to your question, and I think it's probably stated in your staff report, but it's probably for the public who's not looking at the staff report, to reiterate. So the Washington Realized was a sustainable community strategy. The city is going to be awarding a contract here pretty soon for some construction of some improvements in Washington. It's about $12 million worth of streetscape improvements. It does include lighting, enhanced sidewalks, enhanced landscaping strips, et cetera. Not for this section, not for this area, but for the rest of the Washington area. So with the Third and C Gateway Action Plan, we're really just trying to tear up the next phase of work that would be occurring there. So yes, those same deficiencies that we identified and we're working towards addressing with this first rollout of infrastructure projects, we would be incorporating into this Third and C improvements as well.
Great. And what's sort of I know it's early on and many years down the line, but is there a proposed timeline for the 5 various projects that were discussed today? Is that still in flux with a lot of moving components like the streetcar?
Yes, I think that's part of why we're going to go to the Planning Commission and City Council before the end of the year, is kind of get a sense of what their priorities are, and then work with our partners throughout the departments and figure out what's appropriately should be going into our capital improvement program. That's a 5-year budget cycle, and so we can certainly come back and discuss it once we've gotten through all of that to sort of inform the commission on, when those improvements could be happening and how they might be funded. We're at the very sort of early stage where we're attempting to capture the full envelope of the project description so that we can go then get CEQA clearance, because right now these projects don't have CEQA clearance. And so we wanted to get that done before we start looking at implementation and budgeting and sources and uses.
Great, thank you, Katie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I guess I don't want to hog, but I just had one further question. And it was about the 4th project that you described, which was we pulled up the parking management. And I know it's very early still, and so of course it's just trying to grab the broad envelope of possible parking management solutions. And I'm a big fan of Burgers and Brew there, so I know that the parking management is a hot topic. And I see in the proposed actions, or at least the ones included in the plan, it talks about things like installing meters. Are parking garages at all a consideration at this time? from the city? Does that not fit in with the broader Washington plan?
So the Washington Realize document has about a dozen or so parking management strategies that are outlined in the document. They come into play at various different phases in the urbanization of that area. Parking structures always come at the end. So you usually, the life cycle of parking management techniques in terms of the supply side is that you seek to maximize the use of the on-street parking. And then you take underperforming vacant lots, you turn those into surface parking lots. And then once you've kind of tapped out that as a source, and you've kind of created the mass demand that's necessary for a structure, then you move into structured parking. And I say that because surface parking lots and on-street parking lots, they cost about $7,000 to $8,000 per space to construct. A structured parking space can cost between $25,000 and $30,000. So you want to make sure that you have strong demand and the potential for that space to be constantly filled, so that that revenue stream is kind of dependable. You have a sense of what that looks like over the years through the on-street parking metering system, and then through the off-street, surface lots. So once you have that kind of understood, then you can say, okay, that investment of spending $25,000 to $30,000 on a one parking space in a structure, that will pay out. And so that always happens kind of at the end. So we're at the very beginning, where we kind of like to be, which is that we have a problem. Now, that sounds strange, but from an economic development standpoint, having a problem that's like parking means we're doing something right. Congestion is good when you're trying to urbanize an area. And so the first thing that we need to do is figure out, how do we use our resources that we have out there now better in order to start collect some of that revenue that's necessary to begin to figure out when can we move to structured parking.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah,
It was
you're
very
welcome.
informative. Thank you
My
all.
pleasure.
Any other questions of staff, comments? No? I have a few. And I live in the neighborhood, so I bike and ped all over this place. The first one was on the 3rd Street designation, and I was unclear. I think it was page 5. I couldn't tell if it was a level 1 bike pedestrian priority layer or a level 2. And the reason I ask is because there's a lot of mixed use on 3rd Street. You've got Burgers and Brew, you've got several residential projects. It has a lot of active streetscape. So to me, it's a level 1 in terms of pedestrian and bikes, not a level 2. And that would be my comment, because you're asking for some
Feedback.
policy feedback, and that, I guess that would be my comment. I guess I kind of, is that correct, though, that 3rd Street is a level 2? The map wasn't real clear to me.
So level 1 for pedestrian,
Okay,
and then level 2 for auto.
okay, that makes sense.
And you were saying definitely level 1 for
Yeah,
pedestrian.
absolutely, for pedestrian and even bikes, because I go directly to Rayleigh's Field down that street, and there's a lot of bike activity. 5th Street's a pretty active street
Yes.
for bikes. I understand the crossing issue, and I guess you want to move people over there, but like I said, it's mixed use. Sidewalk cafes are already at Burgers and Brew. It'd be nice to kind of activate the street with sidewalk cafes, as well as the landscaping and the street lighting and all that stuff, so. That's a good street to activate. You had, I think it was, and I'm going to this, the report, which you didn't cover in your presentation, but it was page 20.
It's 20.
This gets into the signage and some of the beautification, the water tank. One of your action items is to determine the best method of beautification and set requirements. And my comment would be on this. Can we do any additional landscaping and cleanup of the lots? Because this is a city structure. I don't know if the county owns some of this property around it, but what's happening is that there's a lot of homeless that walk through this area, and they leave a lot of garbage. And also, because it's a big water tank, residential's looking right at a water tank. So my suggestion would be to add some landscaping. You've got some street trees, you've got a picture of it here, but a little more dense landscaping to buffer the residential neighborhood, and it has some cleanup out there because, they come out, I guess the city maintains that lot, but it's generally pretty bad, so. That'd be my suggestion on beautification. Page 21, the Washington Monument. which is an iconic kind of feature, kind of introduced the area. The location that you're showing is in the middle of Metro Place, which is where I live. There's a homeowners association that, if you want to kind of move it to that location.
So that's actually a mistake.
Oh,
The star
The
got moved.
star is supposed to be
Oh.
on the median shown in the black crossing on C Street, which is going to be a raised median for the streetcar.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's a private street, so if you stick the monument in the middle of the
Yeah,
private
that's a
street, it's going to be an
mistake.
issue.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I would move that definitely into the gateway area, the entry area of the neighborhood, and it's a very nice sculpture, just, it seems like it has to be moved. Parking management, page 24. And again, I live in this neighborhood, but my question had to do with whether the city owns any lots, or I mentioned, she said something about interim, I guess, parking of vacant lots. There's a lot across the street, right across from Burgers and Brew, which for a while was available and people were using it. It's been since signed off. Can somebody explain what's going on with that lot, and is that a private or public lot? I assume it's a private lot, but I don't really know. But
I would be happy to address your concern related to that lot. It is privately owned. People were parking there illegally. The private owner was made aware that people were traversing the property. There are various regulations related to like dust management that require that those signs go up, that we couldn't have people parking there with it being an unimproved surface. That property in itself is, as you identified, it's a natural location for people to want to park. It's in close proximity. It's also included, and Jason, you correct me if I'm wrong, if this has since changed, but it's also included in the project description for the C Street Bridge project. Thank you. So it is still included. There's been much discussion about whether or not it should be included in the project description. By including it in the project description, and we think it's appropriate at this time that it stays in the project description, it is subject to the Federal Highway Administration's acquisition policies. That limits our ability to negotiate with the property owners while the C Street Bridge project is in its sort of design. We have to wait for the design work to complete on the C Street Bridge project. We have to wait for CEQA and NEPA clearance, both the federal and the state environmental clearance, in order to even commence negotiations. That is just part of what the Federal Code of Regulations is related to acquisition of properties when there's a federal money attached, and has to do with the potential that the project could need to use eminent domain to acquire that site if it's necessary for the bridge project. And so we're very sensitive to that restriction, and so we are not attempting to negotiate with that property owner at this time, and we would anticipate that would be either a partial acquisition or potential full acquisition, but that would be associated with the bridge project and not as part of this parking management plan.
okay. Yeah, and I was just looking at your finding here that there's sufficient parking supply, on-street parking supply in the 3rd and C study area. I would say north of the study area, you've got, mainly these developments have one-car garages, so people are parking on the street. So that may be a current condition, although I can tell you it's certainly, going to need some additional off-street parking as well as on-street parking. So that finding I'm a little curious about. That's almost 1,100 spaces. That's not really what I'm counting on this map, but a lot of that parking is taken up by, I'm just reading the finding here, 430 spots in 3rd and C study area of,
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I was a little unclear about the finding, and I'm just saying that there probably certainly is a need for additional off-street parking in the area, so.
To the Commissioner's point, the area that's in blue, there are between 400 and 430 on-street
Okay.
parking spaces in that area in blue. Washington in its entirety has about 1,100.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, thank you. Any other comments?
Sorry about that, sorry. Oh, I only had one question. I noticed that you had mentioned in here Second Street, and there's a lot of grass back there and areas, and I noticed there was, in your diagram for, I think, 2032, there was some talk of like recreation parks. Would that area be, could that area be used for parking as well? I think it was on,
Second Street, where all the grass is growing out.
I don't think it's been contemplated
Where?
for here.
This?
it's on Second Street, yeah.
Right, so where the park, the riverfront.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand. Are you referring to page 11 in the handout?
Mine aren't numbered, but.
We have three segments of
sorry.
Second Street, so I just want to make sure I'm giving you an answer based on the correct segment.
So I'm looking at page 8, how you have them marked in Zone A, B, and C. And I noticed that, on Second Street, you have all that area that's like grass or weeds or whatever. And in one of and I don't know which page it was on, but it listed it as recreation parks.
I believe you're referring to, is it that diagram right there, sir? It's on page 9.
Yes.
So it's segment C, and there's a green rectangle. Is that the area that we're referring to?
Yes, that is, but also the connecting areas as well, as you're going behind Burgers and Brews and behind the three-story lofts.
Okay, so that area, the remaining areas, I think, is that what you're referring to, is that as a potential for like an interim surface parking
Yes.
lot? That's certainly one of the things that we're going to explore. Most of that is privately owned, and so we're trying to maximize what we can do with property that the city already has control over, or look at constructing infrastructure, making infrastructure improvements that'll have on-street parking with them as well. So as you can see on the page 9, there's a diagram for a new sort of cul-de-sac, Hammerhead Street that runs east-west in the B section, and then a new cul-de-sac that runs north-south in the C. It would be to improve those streets and then put on-street parking. So it would be lit, secure, striped, metered, normal sort of downtown-looking on-street parking versus the sort of curbless, lightless, stripeless situation that we have out there today.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Actually, I'd like to make a motion then to formally forward the commission's comments to the next level, whatever that is, council, just for consideration.
To Planning Commission, I think.
Planning Commission. Okay, thanks.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. Thank you. Nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, we have I guess the meeting calendar. There's no change, right, to the,
Yeah, if the commission would take a look at the agenda, the next meeting has been set for Monday, November 6, 2017.
okay, that was already on our master calendar. Okay.
Correct.
Any reports from city staff?
There is one. Katie Yancey with the Economic Development Department, who you just spoke with, is here to provide an update. At the request of the commission previously, you asked for information with regard to South River Road and Pioneer Bluff, specifically the future alignment of South River Road, how that is could potentially be affected by future development. So Katie, being the project manager for the Pioneer Bluff area, is the perfect person to provide that information for the commission.
Thank you, Jason, for that introduction. So as Jason mentioned, I am also, in addition to working in Washington, I'm the project manager for the Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock Reuse Master Plan. I had the opportunity to present back in May of last year to this commission regarding the work that was being done to develop a deindustrialization strategy as well as a conceptual land development strategy for that area that would focus on how to deindustrialize the site as well as do the business relocation and the environmental remediation that's necessary to get to kind of cleaned and scraped so that we could start doing our planning work. And the question that I understand from Jason that you had was related to the work that typically follows before you get to land development, which is establishing what the street grid is. And so Pioneer Bluff was in an unusual place where we expect that some of the existing uses as well as the existing infrastructure out there could last for up to the next 10 to 15 years and sort of go through an incremental phasing and continual deindustrialization with segment improvements that are being made to the road as well as potentially like the trail and the levee setback out there. Jason had informed me that you all were kind of wondering where things were. So I thought I would give you a quick update on how things are progressing in that department. We have established the flood setback with the Central Valley Flood Protection Board and the Army Corps of Engineers in Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock. This was the first critical phase for us to determine where the road was going to go. It helped us understand if South River Road could stay in its existing configuration, because it tells us how much developable land do we have on the waterward side of South River Road. If the setback is 300 feet, maybe you need to look at moving the road either to sit on the crown of the levee, or maybe you need to look at moving the road farther to the west so you can have that really precious waterfront development parcels at a reasonable size. We successfully established a setback line and presented that to the council in June. It's a reasonable setback. It looks like we'll only have to tinker with the alignment of South River Road a bit. We issued an RFP for civil engineering work to be done to develop a preliminary street grid, 15% engineering and segment-by-segment cost estimates for South River Road, as well as the rest of the street grid in Pioneer Bluff and Stone Lock. So that would include like the realignment of Locks Drive, which would connect to the new northern roundabout that was constructed with Village Parkway. It would also look at how Locks Drive should connect to the rest of the grid to the west. It would look at some internal collectors as well. We'd also be looking at how Pioneer Bluff would reconnect to Jefferson after the rail relocation occurs. So we issued the RFP on the 11th. We received 3 proposals on the 25th, and we met in a selection panel. The city engineer and myself met along with another staff person. We reviewed the proposals, and we selected a firm called AECom. We're going to make a recommendation to the city council on the 20th that they enter into a contract with AECom to conduct civil engineering work. That will include the deliverable of a 15% engineered street grid that includes arterials, minor arterials, and collectors, for them to do a schematic of local roads, for them to look at some issues related to the Broadway Bridge that have come up about certain planning documents that say certain roads are supposed to connect in configurations that may conflict with the best configuration for the Broadway Bridge. We're going to do some work on active transportation, looking at how bicycle and pedestrian connectivity should be occurring in the area. And then last but not least, the reason why you all asked me to come is that we're going to be looking at interim improvements for the sections of South River Road that will remain. Not all of it will remain because the road is configured oddly, and with the setback, we do have some areas that are pinching down where development will be less than likely to occur, so we may be looking at sort of pulling that road away from the river a bit, straightening out the curve and widening it so it has a uniform configuration, because right now it's not uniform. That work will be completed in March of next year. It will be included in the reuse master plan, which we would expect would go to the city council sometime in April. So before we do that, we'll be coming back to this commission with our preliminary findings, and then we will be completing our CEQA work at the end of next year and hopefully moving towards implementation. I know one of you commissioners asked me about the process of getting funding and how do we make the project real. Jason and I and several other people will be working on a 5-year CIP for those items as well. So we will also be looking at funding sources and potential action items related to implementation of issues like lighting, sidewalks, curb and gutter issues that we've heard complaints about related to South River Road. So if you have any questions or concerns, I'd be happy to hear from you now. There's not much else I can do other than provide you that information that I've shared with you tonight. Thank you.
Any questions for staff?
I have a question related to streetlights. Is there some policy in place at this point where the city requisitely is always going to use lighting that's probably LED lights that kind of face down in the with the specific goal of not directing any light upwards into the sky to mitigate as much light pollution into the air as possible. You know, the type of street lighting I'm talking about. Is that something that at some point was made policy to where it's not a decision of what sort of light is less expensive than some light? It's just by requisite you will use those types of lights.
I'm going to look at my colleague who works in the Public Works Department and ask him if he can answer your question, sir.
In certain conditions, the dark sky concept lighting that you're referring to is going to be absolutely implemented. So in certain cases, like along the Riverwalk, for instance, there's going to be some investigation into potential mitigation for fish species, fish habitat, where you don't want direct lighting, say, on the water surface. You also don't necessarily want direct lighting going up, which also creates light pollution. So, it's going to be a case-by-case basis. With city streets, for instance, we do have standards that we have to meet for lighting. So right now, use of LEDs is a standard that we've been implementing throughout the city. PG&E has been doing the same with the lights that they own. Roughly half of the street lights in the city of West Sacramento are PG&E owned. The other half of them are owned by the city. So as far as the standard goes, right now we base our implementation of street lighting on meeting the requirements for enhanced lighting on the street for safety purposes. In some case-by-case basis, we'll be looking at some other applications. We, at this time, don't have a standard where we specifically are doing it just for avoidance of light pollution.
Okay. Yeah, it's, from what I've gathered, it seems LEDs are in use. And in fact, a street light on my street in Broderick was a PG&E owned light, and they put an LED light there instead of the previous incandescent bulb that was in there.
There's significant savings as far as efficiency, both from electricity standpoint, electricity savings, but also for the amount of light that's emitted by LEDs, significantly greater than with incandescent lighting. So that's the standard that we're going to now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Any other questions? I just had one about the bluff area. Does that includes the tank farms?
Yes, it does.
And you said 10 to 15-year transition period. I was just wondering how long that use is going to continue and whether that ownership group has talked with the city about a formalized transition or reduction in that use. That's going to take a fairly major change, I would think.
So one of the tank farms has actually already been acquired. The port acquired the Shell property, in case it sort of happened under the radar, but I'm happy to opine on that. So and then to your point, the larger sort of scheme for a tank farm relocation. The port acquired the Shell property in a transaction that occurred just a few months ago. Shell contacted the port and expressed interest in decommissioning their facility. They were very aware of the Broadway Bridge. They're also very aware of the increased traffic, pedestrian traffic that's occurring through their site. So they looked to reposition themselves. And that transaction requires that the Shell cease operations in 4 years, that they demo their structures at their own cost, that they clean up at their own cost, and that 4 years following that, that the property is available for acquisition by the port at a price that's been set today. So that's one of our 2 tank farms that we're working on. The other tank farm, we have had some discussions with about sort of what it would take to compel them to relocate, and we're going to continue to have those conversations with them. We're also sort of working with them to figure out where's a reasonable relocation facility, and we've been talking to our partners across the river to understand how they're planning on relocating their tank farms. So it's very preliminary, but I would say based on the success that we had with Shell, I don't think it's unrealistic to assume that we would have a strategy that we could implement and have in place in the next 10 to 15 years in terms of the remaining tank farm that's on Pioneer Bluff.
Okay, thank you. It just seemed a little unrealistic, but it sounds like there's a lot of proactive steps that are occurring to make it happen.
Yeah, I think one down, one to go is a good place to be at right now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any further questions for staff? Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Any future agenda items to add to our future meetings?
I just had a thought as we heard the discussion today about the Washington plan and the possibility of having meters installed there in the future. And I know that we're coming up on our next meeting in November. It'll be about 5-6 months of having meters in the Bridge District. And I don't know if that's too soon or if that would be an appropriate time to maybe get a report about how the usage has gone of those meters so far in the Bridge District.
I can talk with our engineering division and have them provide us an update on the meter installations. Are you thinking specifically for an update on the meter installations or on the effectiveness of the meters themselves?
I was thinking about the effectiveness and the utilization, just since paid meters in West Sacramento is sort of a brave new world, and it seems that's the direction we'll be moving in as we urbanize the riverfront area. And so now that we've had the first 5 to 6 months of it, I was wondering, we've had the River Cat season, we've had farmers markets at the barn, we've had off the grid at the barn, so there's been several events, and I was curious what the utilization rate would be.
Information may be available as maybe potentially presented to the Environment and Utilities Commission, since that would fall under their purview. I can look and see if information on that has been made available, and I can provide that for the commission. If for some reason it has not been made available to the Environment and Utilities Commission, I can ask for that information to be provided.
Great, thank you.
Any other topics? Okay, no. Having here none, this meeting's adjourned.